Good afternoon. This is Chris Kowalski, your lecturer and host for this tutorial number 4, Leadership Theory on Servant Leadership. This is Leadership Studies 1 CLC version for the 15th of October at 3 p.m. We will start in just a minute. Let me see if anyone joins us live. So I'm going to mute myself for just a moment. If you're watching this in an archive broadcast, in just a moment we will get started with the material. Thank you. Okay, my name is Chris Kowalski. I'm your lecturer. Today is our 4th tutorial out of 5 for Leadership Studies 1 cohort number 1 at 3 o'clock on 15th of October 2014. Today's subject is on servant leadership, and so we're going to work through some material on that will be, you'll see in different versions on your lesson templates. But that's such an important topic that we want to consider it in a variety of forms. And so give me a moment and I will get started with our material for today. Today you'll see that, as I mentioned before, today's topic is on servant leadership. What we're going to do is see if there are any quick questions or clarifications on assessments due, particularly if anyone joins us live. I just want to announce to the class or anyone who's reading this that a number of you have been emailing me about different questions. I have responded to almost all of those emails and will respond to the rest of them very shortly. I was fairly deeply sick this last week and got a bit behind on that, but I'm caught up again. So just please know that I am there to respond to you, and I will get to you as soon as possible. I have responded to a number of students individually, but set the reply so that everyone can view it in their email or if you read messages on Funda, because a lot of you are asking the same questions in regards to further clarification on a variety of assessments. And so I'm doing my best, if multiple people ask the same thing, to reply to the entire class, since I'm sure there are others out there who have similar sorts of questions. So if you get a reply from me, but it's addressed to another student, please know that I am replying to you as an entire class for your benefit. If that is not helpful to you, just scroll forward to your next mail. And I appreciate you being a part of this class. I see that there are some people that are joining us live, so let me give them a second to get set up and ask if there are any questions. Are there any questions for anyone out there in regards to questions and clarifications on assessment? If not, I will jump straight into Funda for a moment and then our material for today. You'll see that I've opened up your Funda tab, and I just want to just remind anyone who is watching this that if you go to assignments, we have an assignment that is due today. It is assignment number 2, your critical analysis paper on contemporary leadership theory. Basically what you are doing here, I know that is fairly small on your screen, is you are researching and writing a critical analysis paper of 1,000 words, that's roughly 4 pages of typed text in your body, on one of the 10 contemporary leadership theories that we have introduced in class. Essentially what you're doing is you are evaluating the strengths and liabilities inherent in this approach to leadership in society today, and then you are including roughly a 5th page of text, which is a mini case study of 250 words attached to the essay that analyzes a current global leader and utilizes in your discussion a discussion of what sort of effect they use the leadership theory you just discussed in their own area of leadership. So you're going to evaluate an actual person or an actual company that is leading, and kind of attach that with your discussion about the theory of that particular area of leadership. Attach that as one essay. When you're done, you're going to attach your essay to the assignment tab under assessment number 2, where I currently am as normal. It's due at 11:55 tonight, October the 15th, on Tuesday. And then what you're going to do is you're going to also attach it, and I will jump out of this assessment and into our forums, because I want you to post your essay in 2 different places. You'll see that I've created a folder called assessment number 2, peer evaluation of critical analysis essay. And if you click inside of this folder, you're going to see that there is place for you to post your actual leadership theory. We have one very diligent student, Jaira, who has already done this morning. And what you need to do, click on the full description, is you essentially need to post your essay in the message form of this particular forum folder. When somebody else posts their essay, you need to read their essay in a thoughtfully reflective manner. And then what you need to do for your final section, and this is a second 250-word response, not the case study, but a second 250-word response, is to reply in a thoughtful way to another student's essay. You are not trying to be an editor or a critiquer of the manner or the effectiveness in which they have written, or whether they have grammar errors, etc. What you're doing is you're analyzing their ideas in a thoughtfully reflective manner to engage a little bit further in dialogue with another fellow student, particularly since we all are at a distance from each other. We're not talking in class in person. And so essentially you're replying to that mail or that message, and you're going to do that, and that is due on Thursday, October the 16th, by the end of the day at 11:55. I have messaged you multiple times in a variety of ways in regards to telling you about this information. If it is still confusing to you, please email me in the next 24 hours and I will do my best to get back to you with sufficient time. But that is your assessment that is going to be due both tonight and tomorrow, different components of it. Going back to the assessments or the assignments section, you'll see that assignment number 3, a video presentation upload of your storyline and storyboard, is due in 2 weeks from today, the 29th of October at the end of the day. I will be messaging you a bunch more information on that, and a portion of our last tutorial next week on the 22nd of October will cover specifically how to do this assignment. But just know that in the next few days, information on what a storyline is and what a storyboard are will appear within your lessons template, and that you will have some time to begin to conceive of a video. Now, one thing I need you to start working on if you are unfamiliar with technology and how to upload videos to the internet is to figure out just a means to do that. I'll share more about this next week, but just know that you basically have 2 ways to do this. The easiest way would be that you upload the video directly to YouTube or Vimeo. You can set the settings on that to private if you don't want the whole world to see that, although I guarantee you not hardly anyone will, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But you're going to need to send me that link copied into a document that you put into the assignments folder, and just enable me to be able to click on that link and watch your video so that I can assess you at the end of this term. The other way that you can do that if you're not comfortable with that being that public is to upload a link and your video via Google Drive, which is a file uploading free service that anyone with a Gmail account can use. And again, you could send me a link that way as well. Either way is sufficient. So please read through this. I replied to a number of people publicly in regards to questions about more specificity on assignments. If you got a mail but it was a reply to somebody else, you got that mail because my answer I thought was appropriate for everyone to hear and clarified sort of a general issue in regards to assessments. And so please make sure you read through those mails and messages to answer your questions. My guess is most of your questions will be answered as you do that, okay? Last thing I want to say is the following. Going into our lessons section, just know that Learning Lab 2, Unit 1, Part 3, sorry, I said that out of order, and Unit 2, Part 1 are very shortly going to be uploaded to give you more work to begin to work through in terms of learning via the online lesson template. Are there anyone that has questions about any sort of assignments before I move forward and jump out of Funda for the time being and move into our work for today? Okay, what I'm going to do is this. I want to start our discussion, our brief discussion and reflection on servant leadership today via a short interview with Desmond Tutu, excuse me. He was interviewed by people from the Nobel Peace Prize Institute a few years ago in relation to his thoughts on leadership. And he said some wonderful things about the impact and power that servant leadership has. And I thought it would be wonderful today to listen to just one of our South African legends in speaking about servant leadership. And we'll move into our topic just after that. So let me set that video up so that you can play it, so that it can be played, excuse me. Here we go. This is Desmond Tutu on servant leadership.
What, in your opinion, makes a good leader? What qualities?
Sorry, hold on one second. I'll make sure that you guys can see this. Give me one moment.
What, in your opinion, makes a good leader? What qualities?
Yes. It's a question that we've had to deal with quite a bit, looking at some of the leaders we have had who have sometimes led their countries into disastrous situations. I think ultimately you want a leader who is also a servant. I mean, really, the leader is a leader because he is a servant. When you look at some of the greatest leaders, Nelson Mandela is someone who is not in it for his own aggrandizement. He leads on behalf of, for the sake of. That is one. And it almost always is that the great leader will show just how he is or she is a leader for the sake of the land by suffering.
A person who is a servant as well. That is the ultimate.
For me, yes. That you are not one who is seeking self-glorification, who wants to feather his nest. Just look, say, I mean, you can look at Mother Teresa or any, I mean, Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama. You'll see that a great characteristic is they are doing something, sacrificial in a way for the sake of those they are serving, and suffering. Well, the Dalai Lama has been in exile for 50 years. Nelson Mandela was in jail. Mother Teresa lives with the poor. She lived with the poor. Mahatma Gandhi, you could go on, Martin Luther King. And then the great leader is someone who is inspiring, inspires his followers, her followers. Aung San Suu Kyi. I mean, she said nothing very much for 11 years, and yet she remains the only real leader in Burma. Why? That somehow the leader encapsulates and somehow represents the best that is in the people, the aspirations of the people. And yes, it is someone who can inspire.
Okay, what I'd like you to do for a moment, if you're watching this, particularly via broadcast or later on, is just pause this video for a moment. I'm also going to leave a couple minutes of just sort of quiet space. And I just want, before we jump into any sort of material on servant leadership, for you to simply take a bit of reflection and ask yourself, what did you hear Desmond Tutu say in regards to the power and the impact that servant leadership has? Take a moment and literally write out a thought or two on that, and then I will move us forward in a moment. If you have a Bible available, what I'd like you to do very quickly before we jump into our material is turn to Mark chapter 10, verse 42. Again, Mark chapter 10, verse 42, in whatever translation or language you read in, that's fine. I'm going to read you a couple translations. One is from the NIV version. That's the small left-hand column on the left side of the screen. And then I'm going to jump up and read you a paraphrase version of that from the Message, just to get a bit of a sense of a little bit of Jesus' thinking on the sort of leadership that he really valued and why he valued that. And so without turning this into a full Bible study, again, go to Mark chapter 10, verse 42. And I want to just make a general comment before we move into our material today. So Jesus, in this scripture, was just asked by James and John, two of the disciples that he was most deeply close to, what do we need to do to really sort of sit with you and be present with you forever in glory? And Jesus said very quickly, you have no idea what you're saying, James and John. You really are speaking in haste. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And he was deeply referring to his coming suffering and death as a suffering servant, as the Messianic Savior. And James and John, sort of without thinking, say, of course we can. And so Jesus says, okay. And he calls together the rest of his disciples. And in verse 42, this is what he says. It says, Jesus called them together and he said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. And so what he was trying to say by way of addressing this sort of issue of the sort of leader that he was, or the sort of leadership or ministry that he was about, he was saying, you're aware of a system that the Gentiles use every single day where they take their power and they take their authority and they put it over you in a way that you are aware of. And then in verse 43, he totally swiftly turns it on his head. He doesn't affirm that style of leadership, that form of leadership. And he says, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. If you sort of scroll up and read it a bit in the Message paraphrase, highlight it just so you can kind of see where that is. Here's what the Message paraphrase says about this passage. It says, when the other 10 heard of this conversation, they lost their tempers with James and John. Jesus got them together to settle things down. You've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, he said. And when people get a little power, how quickly it goes to their heads. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not to be served, and then to give his life away in exchange for many who are held hostage. And so there are a number of places in the scripture where Jesus speaks about the sort of life that he was going to lead, and almost every single time, if not every single time, his perspective on leadership and his perspective on his ministry and his mission is about as radically upside down from what the disciples were expecting. And I'm thinking of another place in the Gospels where Peter says, must we take up our swords to serve you and to defend you, Jesus? And Jesus just says, no, put them down. I am not that sort of man, not that sort of leader. And so by way of contrast and introduction today, I just want to suggest this is a wonderful place within the Gospels for you to meditate and pray and consider sort of Jesus' perspective on leadership. From this place and a few others in the Gospels, most people that write about Jesus as a leader have concluded very accurately that Jesus led from a place of service and humility. And this is one place where we can learn from that. And so just by way of edification, I point that out to you. And I want to move into some material now for the last portion of our class. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, what I'm going to cover over the next 15 minutes or so is material that will also be a part of your lesson template. You have these notes already. They're under the Resources tab in Funda, and so you can go and access this. But servant leadership is such the crux or the foundation of so much leadership within the Christian faith, and definitely a perspective that we support here at Cornerstone. And so I want to just take some time to speak about that today. I know that tutorials are not often for lecturing, and yet this is such a critical subject. It's important that I just briefly touch on it for your own edification. And so here are some thoughts on servant leadership. Sorry, I put up the wrong PowerPoint. Servant leadership. You'll see on your screen that there is a model of servant leadership that was first, within popular culture at least, invented or described by a man by the name of Robert Greenleaf. He wrote an essay after studying executive leadership at Harvard, and basically was the inventor of the term servant leader in 1970. And there's a wonderful essay by him called The Servant as Leader. It's been translated into several different books and expanded and written about for decades since 1970, and yet I like it because it's the primary source, in a sense, for the concept of servant leadership within popular culture and leadership theory today. And here's a quote from this essay that is sort of the crux of the matter. Robert Greenleaf writes, "The servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then, conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from the one who is leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive or to acquire material possessions." Take a moment and read that again on your own. And as you're doing that, why don't you just scan up at this picture, this icon up here on the screen, and this image, and just look at some of the behaviors that Greenleaf identified as behaviors of a servant leader. The powerful thing for me as I consider Greenleaf's thought here is the fact that a servant leader at its heart is simply a person that chooses to serve first, that this is a conscious choice, and that out of that place of service, servanthood, out of that place of blessing others, out of that place of wanting the best for others, wanting to meet their needs, one leads. I mean, I know that sounds, if you've been around the Christian faith or around the concept of servant leadership for any length of time, I know you kind of are nodding your head going, yes, I understand, move on to stuff I don't. And yet, just imagine for me for a moment how revolutionary this idea would have been to a culture that had not considered this before. A culture in which leadership, particularly in Western cultures, was all about power. It was all about the retaining, the acquisition, and the use of power and authority. It was about strength. It was about following directions and authority and a clear chain of command. And so for Greenleaf to come along and like I said, to turn that up on its head is very similar to how Jesus turned up the disciples' perspective on leadership on their heads. And so there's one reason why this idea is stuck throughout culture. So what is servant leadership theory in brief? Servant leadership theory essentially says that leaders prioritize identifying and meeting their followers' needs. They serve rather than being served. They create an environment of trust, cooperation, and reciprocal service. So serving another person, particularly from a position of power or authority, often, if not almost always, results in reciprocal service. So you're creating a culture where you begin to serve and bless and consider the other. And ultimately, from a business perspective, this will usually result in much higher performance and ownership for people that are following a leader within a company or corporate situation. I've mentioned this already, and so I won't say much more, but Jesus is by far the longest and probably most familiar historical example of a servant leader. The idea here, as that video you watched right at the start of your module introduction material, made an interesting comment in regards to Jesus and how he was a servant leader by saying that people followed Christ out of love and gratitude as opposed to compulsion or fear. And I think that's, again, a very simple, very, very profoundly transformative idea that people naturally want to respect, they want to own, they want to participate in and follow others, and yet they want to do that from a place not of compulsion or not of fear or not of punishment, but from a genuine care, love, and intimacy. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. Creating this base of principles of servant leadership, there's many of them. I'm not going to go over them in depth, but I'll quickly touch on them. Now, he has at least 10. I want you to see, as I quickly sort of skim over these with a few comments, just how other-centered his principles of servant leadership are, again, revolutionary in the day and up until today as well. He says that servant leadership is about active listening. It's about deliberately practicing as the leader, listening for and to the needs of another. You do that listening with empathy. You try to understand and recognize the other person's feelings, to talk about a time in your life when you experienced a similar thing, and to identify with those you are following. This leads to healing. That a servant leader actually helps foster each one of their followers' emotional and spiritual health and wholeness, that they are not just about performance or profit or a bottom line margin of dominance within a company. They are about the restoration and the wholeness of those they are working with. Point 4, servant leadership is about awareness. It's about understanding who you are as a leader and understanding the people that you lead, and really seeking to be mindful of those things as you lead them. Point 5, servant leadership is about persuasion. It's about the positive influence of another's attitudes and behaviors through respectful communication. It's not about lording communication or power of another. It's about listening and responding, listening and responding. Servant leadership is about conceptualization, the idea that we need to understand where people presently are at and want to move to in the future as a possibility. And a servant leader understands the journey from present reality to future possibility. A servant leader is about foresight, number 7. It's basically the ability to predict actions that could influence the future and sort of having a forward-thinking approach to that. A servant leader is about stewardship. A servant leader values stewardship, the responsibility to safeguard and protect and keep well the organization or the team, as you would do your own family, as you would do your own spouse, as you would do your own children. And that degree of value really sort of brings ownership to a team or to an organization. Servant leadership is about commitment. It's about the depth of your willingness to help others grow, everyone within the team, and it's about, lastly, the building of a community. Servant leadership is solution-oriented, and there's a value underneath to build a sense of community, of family, of intimacy within an organization where each other can be formed and built up in trust. Another quote from Robert Greenleaf, he says, "This is my thesis." He says, "Caring for persons, the more able and the less able serving each other." You hear that idea of reciprocal service again? He says, "This is the rock upon which a good society is built. Whereas until recently, caring was largely person to person, So individual to individual. Now, most of it in our society is mediated through institutions, often large, complex, powerful, impersonal, not always very competent, at times corrupt. And just think about that in relation to things like pensions, things like medical insurance, things like healthcare, and how often we relegate the care or the care of those things, the safeguarding of those things, to institutions as opposed to individuals. And so he says this, he says, if a better society is to be built, one that is more just and more loving, one that provides greater creative opportunity for its people, then the most open course is to raise both the capacity to serve and the very performance as servant of existing major institutions by new regenerative forces operating within them. Essentially what he's saying there is that the care for people in this way, even through an institution, must still come from a place of personal student leadership, even if you're running or facilitating a massive government organization. Very, very powerful idea found in his follow-up book to The Servant as Leader called The Institution as Servant. One more guy that I just want to sort of give a quote to you from, and he is one of my favorite authors in all of Christendom. His name is Henry Nouwen. And in one of my favorite books ever on leadership called In the Name of Jesus, Nouwen writes this, excuse me. He says, somehow we have come to believe that good leadership requires a safe distance from those we are called to lead. Medicine, psychiatry, and social work all offer us models in which service takes place in a one-way direction. Someone serves, someone else is being served, and do not mix up or mess up those roles. Now, I ask a very provocative question here. But how can anyone lay down his life for those with whom he is not allowed to enter into a deep personal relationship? Laying down your life means making your own faith and doubt, hope and despair, joy and sadness, courage and fear available to others as ways of getting in touch with the Lord of life. The world in which we live, a world of efficiency and control, has no models to offer to those who want to be shepherds in the way that Jesus was a shepherd. Even the so-called helping professions have been so thoroughly secularized that mutuality can be only seen as a weakness and a dangerous form of role confusion. The leadership about which Jesus speaks of is a radically different kind from the leadership offered by the world. Now it concludes, it is a servant leadership, to use Robert Greenleaf's term, in which the leader is a vulnerable servant who needs the people as much as they need him or her. Now that's a mouthful there, and that's a lot on servant leadership, and I would love for you actually to more reflectively and in a slower manner return to these quotes and these ideas to consider their implications. And yet, given our time, what I'd like to advocate that we do with the rest of our time today, and I'll leave about 5 minutes for this on the video before I sign off, is I want to encourage you to take longer than the 5 minutes they'll be online and do a free writing exercise. Take out a journal and a pen, and what I want you to reflect on is not only what you have learned about now 10 leadership theories on a macro level, but what you now and in your reading and in the material that is in the lessons templates, what you know now about the power of servant leadership in particular. What I'm asking you to write, I'm asking you to describe a vision or a preferred picture of the future of the impact of servant leadership upon your own area of leadership influence. And now we're not talking about servant leadership as a general discipline, we're talking about how are you being a servant leader here or here or here. What areas of society could be transformed? Think in dialogue and pray about this. As you have a sense, my challenge to you is that you would begin to move forward towards that place. Take a moment, if you're watching this live or if you're watching this via broadcast, and I want you to spend some moments writing freely about that. I'll come back in about 5 minutes to wrap things up and close down our session for today. Okay, I hope this material has begun to stir some things in you and has begun to really influence in a fresh way how you consider leadership. I know that as a Christ follower, we're supposed to embrace the model of Jesus, which in many ways, as I was mentioning earlier, is that of a profound servant suffering on our behalf and for our good. And yet, the more I consider servant leadership, the more upside down I just remember that it is, and the more difficult I see that it is to embrace. Even looking through Greenleaf's principles of servant leadership or the servant leader, I am just struck by the degree and the depth to which I still need to grow into those things. And so I hope that this has been a profitable exercise for you, and that you would continue thinking through this and just drawing implications for your own life. That is all we have for today. Just a reminder that your essays are due to be posted to Funda by 11:55 tonight, October the 15th, and that your forum response post to another person's essay that you have posted your own, and then you respond to another person's essay with a 250-word response within our Funda discussion forum. That is due tomorrow, October the 16th at 11:55. So over the next 2 days, you have two portions of your assignment due, one a big paper and another a much smaller, more informal response post. Please email me if you have any questions at chrisk@cornerstone.ac.za. And if not, I will see you online for our final tutorial of the term next week, October the 22nd at 3 o'clock. Take care and God bless.